All right, it's time for Monday Night Gospel Grit. I hope that the week is beginning excellent for you, church fam. I pray that it's been a good Monday, knowing that we are just in the hands of a very good and capable God who's formed us, who has, as it were, touched our hearts and really breathed his life into us by his Spirit. So I just pray that we are living in light of what he's done for us, especially what he's done for us in the person of Christ, and that we're beginning to live in light of what we have just heard on the Lord's Day, the rest that we received, the spiritual nourishment, the food, the rest, all of that as we begin to live life. That's what gospel grit is going to the house of the Lord, communing with him, getting all the benefits thereof, and then living life for his glory. So all that to say, I pray that this Monday has been good for you. And now as you arrive to Monday night, I have a video that I think the topic is going to be, Lord willing, just a very, very practical, very simple approach to what I have personally seen ruin families, ruin marriages, ruin friendships, ruin churches. I've been in the Christian game long enough. I've been around, the ministry for some years now, and there's just this one little thing that keeps on, as it were, popping its ugly head up over and over again. And I see it, obviously it's sin in some capacity, but one of the ways that this sin manifests itself is in something called assuming. Now, for the sake of this video and the sake of language, I won't use the old saying, which assuming does something to you and me, as you know, the saying goes. But really assuming motives, assuming intent, and assuming malintent. Assuming good, that's biblical, right? But assuming the worst, that is not biblical. That's actually rooted in some deeper sin that you might be unaware of, that you are harboring. So when we get to counseling, anytime we talk about biblical counseling, we're trying to go to the matters of the heart. All these things pop up, all these ugly weeds and sins pop up, but really they all can be traced back to something that's happening internally. And as I stated, this thing called assuming has just been such a plague in the church. Not our church, not to say our specific local body, but just as I've seen it played out in Facebook or social media or just hearsay, it always seems like assuming just does not go well, because it's not wisdom, it's not good, it's not in step with the Spirit. So you see verses like this in 1 Corinthians 13:7, the famous chapter on love. It says, love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. So basically what Paul is getting at is, if you truly love someone, you're going to believe the best of them, right? You are given a scenario where someone comes to you and responds either, in your opinion, harshly, in your opinion, short. You have the ability to say, I love that brother or sister enough to know they probably just had a misstep there, or their tone was off, but they probably didn't mean anything by it. And then you could just, one of my favorite verses in all the scriptures is, a love covers a multitude of sin. Another proverb, Peter reiterates it, love covers a multitude of sin, because you could just say, hey, I love that brother, sister enough to know I could just let that slide for this time. If it becomes a pattern, if it becomes consistent, then at that point, rather than assuming and just treating it as such, as reality, that's not the right answer either. It's, okay, well, I've seen this 3 times over. Now I'm going to assume that this is the case. I'm going to assume that they're short. I'm going to assume that they have a short temper. I'm going to assume whatever sin that is there before you. Rather than assuming that that is the case, you need to go to that individual and say, hey, this is what I've noticed. What are your thoughts? Hey, this is what I've noticed. Would you agree or disagree? Hey, this is what I've noticed. I didn't want to assume, so I'm coming to you. And based on what that individual says, whether admission or denying it, there's a sense where you had to believe all things again. If someone says, I didn't mean anything by that, it must have just been, a misunderstanding, miscommunication. I was not upset, or I wasn't angry, or whatever. Then that's where you as an individual need to say, okay, well, I'm glad that I cleared the air, and I'm glad that I brought it before you. And then we could just dismiss it and keep moving forward. Now you can't go away from that and say, well, I know what they really were thinking, or I know what they really meant by that, or and then you keep on assuming, because then you're still falling back into this the error, the sin. So what you got to do is deal with it, and when you get the response, whether even if that doesn't agree with what you would assume is the case, you have to take that individual's word for it. Now, again, if you have a visible, there's a difference between a visible, concrete sin and something that can be interpreted as sin. What do I mean by that? A father being harsh with his child by saying or doing something that is visibly harsh, and there's no assumption needed. That is harsh. That is one thing. But a father who perhaps could say, "Oh, just 1 second," and it could be interpreted as harsh, but it might not necessarily be harsh. Those are two different categories. Violating the law of God deliberately or incidentally, but still violating the law of God, that is a sin. There's no assumption that goes on there. But when there is a matter of interpretation, the way it made you feel, or the way that the tone sounded, or what something of that nature, those are matters of interpretation. So you can't say point blank that was a sin. You need to deal with it relationally. And again, back to 1 Corinthians 13. If you truly love your brother or sister, you'll believe the best out of them before judging them according to that assumption, and then holding them liable, holding them responsible, and now treating them in light of that assumption. You see how dangerous this is? This is what I would say is, when people live in assumptions, they don't live in reality. They live in a fantasy world. They live in a world that does not exist. They live in a world that they are making up, that they are fashioning, that they are carving out in their minds, and it might not even be, it might not even be reality. Could it be? Could it correspond to reality? Perhaps. But let me show you how this can play, let's just say a marriage, or let's say a relationship, a friendship, whatever, anything, right? You have individual A who's assuming about individual B. Individual A keeps on assuming, reading between the lines, attributing motives, and creating this whole alternative reality, while person B has no idea that they're doing this, and person A is never dealing with it. They're staying in the realm of assumptions. Now they're treating person B in light of assumptions, so they're making up this facade, this non-reality world, and they're literally living in that, while this person is in reality, not unaware of this fantasy world. And now there's a complete opposite real tension between these two individuals when one has never dealt with it. So even though this person could be in sin, even though this person could be culpable and liable, that I'm not dismissing that, but until this person takes that and makes it a real thing by dealing with it with that individual, they're living in a made up non-realistic world, because it's a world made up by themselves. Now, could it be the case that it's a true world? Of course, but we don't know that until it's dealt with. So all that to say is, we need to be careful with assuming. Yes, we need to have wisdom. We need to have shrewdness. We need to be gentle. But assuming is not any of those things. We would save ourselves a ton of heartache, a ton of false information, a ton of false emotions, a ton of false reality that we would subject ourselves to if we did not become those who are easily swayed by our emotions, our feelings, and thereby assuming by those easily swayed emotions, like every wind of doctrine is pushing us in each way. Every life circumstances, makes us go this way or that way, and whether that's relational or whatever, having to deal with those assumptions, you're never going to be stable. You're going to always be constantly up and down. This is why I'm saying Christians believe the best out of each other. They give each other the benefit of the doubt. And when the assumption, even in your own heart, says, this is just getting to me, it's weighing on me, then you must deal with it. You have to, or else you're going to be dealing with a false reality, and you're never going to deal with the issue. You believe the best until you can't. Then you meet that person and deal with it. And I'm not saying be gullible, okay? Because there's also verses that speak strongly against those who are gullible. Like Proverbs 14:15-7 says, "The simple believes everything, but the prudent gives thought to his steps." So here it's making a comparison between the simple and the prudent. One believes everything. So that's not what I'm saying. That this is not synonymous with 1 Corinthians 13, right? These are two different dispositions, as it were. First Corinthians talks about love believes all things. Out of those that he cares about, those that he loves about, he's going to give them the benefit of the doubt. And if he can't, he must address it. Proverbs 14 is not that. Proverbs 14 is saying this person just believes everything from about everything and never gives careful thought to any of his steps. So much so, the verses go on that says, one who is wise is cautious and turns away from evil, but a fool is reckless and careless. So the simple who believes everything, simple synonymous with fool, that simple person who believes everything becomes a fool and becomes reckless and careless with his emotions, with his life, because he's getting led astray by everything he believes. Verse 17, a man of quick temper acts foolishly, and a man of evil devices is hated. So you see how there's so much going on with this foolish, simple man, that he believes all things, that he is foolish in his carelessness and his recklessness, and he is quick-tempered because he's swayed by all these things he's believing, and he's literally a man of devices and is hated. So this person who's gullible, he's getting led on by his emotions, by her emotions, of course. Women are not exempt from this, rather than just being cautious, dealing with reality, giving thought, giving the benefit of the doubt, and if need be, go and handle that situation. If your love can't cover a multitude of sins, then you got to deal with it. So there's a major difference between believing the best out of a brother and sister and being gullible. Those are two different things. We don't want anyone to be gullible, but we don't want anyone to be led by their emotions. We want people to be wise, cautious, slow, not assuming, giving the benefit of the doubt, assuming the best. That's a good view of assumption. I feel confident in saying that. Really just going about life relaxed, easygoing, not hung up on every little circumstance, every way that people react or respond to you is going to either shoot you through the roof with excitement, or put you down to the dumps with misery. And we don't want to be conspiracy theorist toward our friends. I'm all for the good conspiracy theory. What's the difference between a conspiracy theorist and reality? About 6 months, they often say. But we don't want that disposition toward our friends, toward our family, toward our loved ones. We don't want to be devising these plots and conspiracies that people have about us or around us, and creating these false narratives, as I already explained. We don't want to be like that toward our spouses, toward our friends, toward our church members, toward anyone. That's just an unhealthy, cynical view that you're just going to end up miserable holding that view. No one's ever going to be able to be your friend, like it said. And a man of evil devices is hated, because it's going to be a pain to be around that individual. So what we need to realize is, when we live by assumptions, there's actually something going on deeper. Remember, I said in the beginning, in biblical counseling, these are just weeds that grow up, but there's a root situation going on. What is driving the assumptions that you have? What is driving the assumptions that makes you worry or second guess or interpret everything negatively around those around you? It's usually something inside that is talking about doubt, a lack of security in Christ, a lack of identity in Christ, a lack of knowing who you are in Christ. So you begin to, in your mind, in your heart, in your emotions, say, well, this person's like that, or this, this person did this because of that. And really, there's so many doubts and unbeliefs and insecurities within your own heart that you're projecting those through assuming the worst of others. So trust in Christ. Trust in Christ's ability to handle his church, handle the family, handle the relationship lives that you have. Trust in him, be secure in him, find your identity in him, and then go about life believing all things in love, believing the best out of others in love, bearing all things in love, being able to cover a multitude of sins in love. You see, this makes a nice, chill, and relaxed and enjoyable Christian, rather than the one who's always assuming the worst about those around him. Remember, assumption is just revealing something that's going on deeper in here, some sin of lack of identity in Christ. So assuming is lazy. Going and dealing with those assumptions biblically, that takes gospel grit. And that's what I'm here to point you to, is deal with the gospel. Remind yourself of what the gospel is. Remind yourself of who Christ is, and don't live in assuming land. Live in reality and deal with what is. If you feel like you're assuming a lot, then go deal with it. confess your sin if it's a sin. If not, deal with it with those around you and have healthy, vibrant relationships. Otherwise, you're going to be the one who's living in fantasy land. Meanwhile, everyone's in reality, and you're going to be going crazy based on your assumptions. We cannot let assumptions dictate, nor rule, nor govern our thought life, our emotional life, our friendships, our families. Because when that happens, I'm telling you, there's no joy, there's no rest, there's no peace, because you're literally saying the assumptions that you have are true, are real, and are Lord over your life. Again, I'm not saying that no assumptions are ever not true. Sometimes your assumptions are right, but you don't know that until you deal with it. So we need to be Christians who have the gospel grit that deal with any assumptions, false assumptions, or true assumptions, doesn't matter, but deal with them. Rather than just living in them, we deal with them and we come to the truth, whereby they're no longer assumptions, that they're either false or they're true. Let's not be a church that assumes the worst about everyone else, that assumes the worst about that person or this person, that assumes the worst in our families, that assumes the worst in our marriages, that assumes the worst in every situation. We will be miserable people. Rather, let's trust Christ. Let's hope in Christ. Let's confide in Christ. Let's know that Christ has purchased my soul from hell. And if he's done that, and then how much more will he do for me now that I'm in him and I can trust him with that I don't need to live in the insecurity of assuming the worst of others. Let's not live in assumption land. Let's live in reality by the gospel, church.